I would suggest to you the big opportunity for us as coaches is to deepen our own self-understanding, because everything we understand about ourselves then becomes something we have a possibility of understanding alongside of someone else.
Welcome to the coaching studio. I'm your host, Lyssa deHart, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Jonathan Reitz, MCC. Jonathan is an executive coach and coach trainer who has dedicated his career to helping leaders unlock the full potential of their teams. He is the author of Coaching Hacks, Simple Strategies to Make Every Conversation More Effective. He is the mastermind CEO and director of training for Flexify. He is also the co-founder of the Team Coaching Global Alliance, and he works with Case Western Reserve University as the director of education for the Weatherhead Coach Education Program. With a career in coaching that began in 1997, Jonathan has worked with some of the most recognizable names in the industry. His commitment to using coaching as a tool for leadership development is what fuels his passion and drives his continuous pursuit of excellence. And if you ever get a chance to ask him, and we will, how did coaching find him? It's a story worth hearing. We're going to hear it today. Jonathan also brings a unique background to his work, having spent over 15 years in morning radio and television before fully immersing himself in the coaching world. Now based in Cleveland, Ohio, he lives with his wife, Joy, and daughter, Julia. Jonathan, welcome to the studio.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And yes, I am going to tell the full, unvarnished story of getting into coaching today,
Well,
including a detail that I typically leave out, but I'll reveal that today.
excellent. Well, let's just even go ahead and start there. How did coaching find you in 1997?
All right. So I was working in a chain of TV stations in 1997. I was about 10 years into my radio and TV career at that point. And I got asked to be a part of a team from the chain of TV stations that went to one of those, the typical offsite session where you've got some outside facilitator and you're working on a shared project together. And we were challenged to come up with new revenue ideas, local revenue ideas that could be deployed in every single one of the stations in the chain. And we're brainstorming through this, and it was not going well. Well, then they brought in this guy to coach us through the process. And 45 minutes into the first session on the first morning after he joined us, I leaned over to Mary Margaret Downey, who you can still find in my Facebook feed. Actually, she goes by Peggy now. But I went to Mary Margaret Downey and I said, I don't know what that guy's doing, but whatever that is, that's what I'm going to do after television, maybe with the rest of my life. And I went up to him at the break. Turned out his name was Steve Martin. Some folks might remember him. Not that Steve Martin, but he was not. He was anything but a wild and crazy guy. In fact, in just a moment, I'll tell you why I say that. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I am part of a new field in this country. Remember, this is April 1997. It was April 25th, 1997, just in case you're wondering. And I'm part of a brand new field in this country called coaching. I work with individuals and leaders and teams to find new ideas, new frontiers, new horizons, new opportunities. And I said, well, I've never seen anything like this. I have to learn how to do this. How do I start? And Steve said to me something in that moment that I really think encapsulates what coaching is all about. He said, he looked for a second. He kind of gave me a thoughtful moment. And he said, you know what? I'll help you. And I literally talked to him multiple times a week, every week for the next 5 years as I got into the coaching environment. And that to me set the tone of what I think of when I think of the coaching profession as a whole.
Mhm.
You know what? I'll help you. That line really to this day, 27, almost 28 years later, makes me say, you know what, this is the profession I want to be a part of. This is just what encapsulates it for me.
Yeah. That's
Now,
amazing.
here's the part I don't usually tell.
I love the giggle that you have as you even start thinking about it.
Remember, in the television business in 1997, we were still on basically square screened televisions. It was now it wasn't cathode ray tube. They weren't the old CRT tubes, but they weren't a whole lot better.
They were still huge instruments typically.
Yes, giant, if you had a 40-inch TV, it was at least 55 inches wide.
And 500 pounds.
And yes, well, right 2 weeks before this event with Steve Martin, Sony came to the TV station where I worked. And it was the first time I ever saw a flat panel monitor, which is, you've probably got three on your desk right now. And it was the first time we ever saw high definition video. And they sat all of us anchors down. I was anchoring the morning news. They sat us all down and they said, we're gonna do camera tests with all of you. And I went, oh, this is gonna be great. This is the future of television. And this is so exciting. And then they pointed the camera at me and they rolled tape. I read a story or two, and then they invited me to come back and look at it. And I went, oh my goodness, I'm getting out of television. Because in those days, high definition television, we didn't know how to light those cameras yet. We didn't know how to position them yet. We didn't know what this would look like, how people would show up in the course. We didn't have video touch up like we have in these Zoom meetings right now. And you don't have any way of knowing this about me through this the video feed, but I'll be self-disclosing here for a minute. I have large pores, which on standard definition television didn't really matter. On high definition television, they had to figure out how to light me and what to do, all those kinds of things. But on this initial image, you could see my pores from space. Now, the other thing about this is that I was a college basketball player. I was a high school and college basketball player. I've broken my nose 11 times. I've broken both my cheekbones. I've broken my left orbital socket. My face is it's not symmetric. And on this initial flat panel monitor, which by the way was a $50,000 piece of equipment that Sony was trying to sell us, which is funny now because they're $200 and you can get them everywhere. This initial image, I had sort of a Picasso flavor, triangle here, square over here, squiggly line down here. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought to myself, well, if this is the future of television, I'm going to be doing something else.
Yeah.
I wonder, but I literally had no idea what it was.
Except for that conversation you'd had with Steve Martin.
No, that was 2 weeks later.
Oh, that was 2 weeks later.
The video came first. And so this seed was planted, and probably it was connected to what Steve was going on. But what I watched Steve do with us was he called out the best in every single one of us. He got us talking to each other instead of over each other. And then he just put icing on the cake in that moment afterward when he said, you know what, I'll help you learn how to do this. And I went, this is the profession. This intrigues me because I had spent all those years in news covering people on their worst day of their lives and then telling their story publicly. It's kind of a horrible business if you think about it. And then stepping back and really knowing that the peaks and valleys of how my day was going to go rose on whether somebody did something horrible, as opposed to coaching, where the peaks and valleys of my day rise on when someone lives into their uniqueness and dives into who they are and how they show up most effectively in the world. It was a complete change of mind, complete change of focus. And I really am so grateful that that happened all those years ago. I almost can't remember what it was like to be the guy going to the crime scene or the court case and learning as much as I could about somebody's worst possible day, as
Mhm.
opposed to what we do in coaching today, which is all about inviting people into their best possible day every single day.
Yeah, and really their best possible future. It's sort of interesting also that sort of reflective piece of as you see yourself in a completely, well, new way, 4K.
Mhm.
You know, it's like that it gives you the opportunity to reevaluate, is this what I want to be doing?
You know, thinking back about the that moment, seeing myself in the Brookside neighborhood of Tulsa, Oklahoma, in that studio, and seeing myself through that new lens, and realizing that everything I had worked to have be my public persona, how people encountered me at first encounter, probably wasn't going to work in the new reality. I think that's a good reminder for all of us, because all of us have moments where we find ourselves in a situation and we realize that what has gotten us here. I mean, Marshall Goldsmith says this all the time.
Yeah,
Lots of high quality thinking goes into this. Your current strategy will only get you so far.
right.
And if you're committed to a larger vision than that, you're probably going to have to adapt multiple times. And I think I was lucky enough to get a 4K reminder that that's what happens sometimes.
Hi, Lyssa here. I want to interrupt real quick and just say thank you for being a viewer on this channel. I very much appreciate you being here. And I'd also like to make an invitation to you. I love to meet people and have more one-to-one interactions with them. And to that end, I have a monthly coaching Q&A. We cover all kinds of topics, coaching related, and I would love to invite you, my treat, to that monthly coaching, those monthly coaching sessions. You can find a link below, and I want to just say thank you, and I look forward to meeting you on a monthly Q&A soon. Cheers. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. It is sort of interesting too, because I mean, the thinking that gets us, I mean, it's the classic problem of the entrepreneur who's trying to scale up. And I mean, even the entrepreneur who's a solopreneur who goes to get their first assistant or help. And I mean, just all the machinations of change that have to happen in our mind around letting go of things so that we can continue to grow whatever the business is that we're growing. I mean, what got me here is not going to get me there. Like I'm going to have to adjust and shift. And I think it's a beautiful place to really explore the coaching, right? Like the work that is just inherent in change. And pretty much everybody on the planet goes through some form of change at some point in their life. What once you got into coaching, you're now coaching in like 1997, you're beginning your career with coaching, and you get into leadership coaching and executive coaching. What was sort of the where did you find your passion around the elements of team coaching and leadership and executive coaching?
The It really was situational. It was based on what I got the opportunity to do. So the first 5 or so years, I still coached internally in that chain of TV stations. So I got a lot of I got training, I got a lot of practice, got skilled at asking questions that were different than the questions I would ask in an interview situation. That's a whole other topic for another day.
Mhm.
Um, After that, I worked for an ad agency for a while as sort of a bridge while I figured out really what I wanted to do. To full disclosure, I was probably, for whatever reason, I was hesitant to go out on my own in 2002. 9/11 had happened. The news business really changed after 9/11. And I knew that HDTV or not or something else, I wasn't going to be doing that for much longer because of the way the news business changed at that point. And so I worked for an ad agency for a while. That was a good experience. Then finally I worked for a large not-for-profit directing their coaching efforts, something we started in 2003 that still today is thriving. They've got several thousand coaches internally inside of this not-for-profit network. And that was really where it all fit. And I wonder how consistent this is with other coaches, where I was drawn to the idea of coaching. I was fortunate that I got to do a lot of coaching day in, day out over the next 6 or 7 years. But it really wasn't until I had some reps, some repetitions. I probably had 1,000 hours behind me, just to use the ICF measurement, maybe 1,500, before I really found myself thinking, you know what? Leaders that have a vision, that can point to the people that are following them, that are taking on new challenges, that are managing change dynamics, and that are committed to developing the people that they oversee. That's who I'm most drawn to working with. And it didn't happen by accident. I was relatively focused, but it also didn't happen overnight, Lyssa. It did take 1,000 hours or so before I realized that, wow, yeah, this is the center of the sweet spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably really accurate because I think in that, like, I think of my own coach, background, and I had gotten my original coach training in 2007, 2008 timeframe, and I started coaching a little bit, and honestly, by when I moved up to Seattle from New Mexico, and I had to shut down my therapy practice. I mean, I had been trained in coaching, but I would say I did not know what I was doing. And I didn't understand really how to navigate between the therapy and the coaching. So I just sort of tossed all the therapy away. And then I was a very wooden coach for a while. And then it took the really diving into coaching, probably about 1,000 hours of really understanding what I was doing before it kind of like the light came on and I had a bigger sense of it. So I think your experience is probably really similar to other people's experience of learning.
The thing I am most grateful to Steve Martin for, it's not the fundamentals in coaching that he taught me, and he did. It's not that. It's that he instilled in me the need for a reflective practice.
Mm.
And that actually seemed very natural to me because of the years in broadcasting. One of my very early influences in broadcasting got me into the habit of recording my shows and then listening back to them. Not right away, because one of the things I discovered about myself, and not everybody is this way, but most people are. One of the things I discovered about myself was that if I listened to a show the day it happened, it was either awesome or awful, and there was nothing in between.
Yeah, super critical or super excited.
Yeah. But if I waited 2 weeks, better yet, the real indication for me was I needed to wait long enough where I couldn't remember what I said next. It's where I was surprised by what I was said, or I was having the urge to say this and then I said it. Where I wasn't able to play it back in my head. Then I could be objective. Then I could actually stop and say, you know what? That was pretty good. I wish I would have done this better, or something along those lines. So that felt very natural to me. And I have literally recorded every coaching session I've had in the last 15 years.
Can we put a pin in this really quickly? Because I think this is so crucially important to
Mm.
coaches, which is this idea. I think a lot of people, and to your point, very few of us go and listen to our voice and are like, oh my God, I have a voice made for radio, whatever, right? Like you maybe did, but most people are like,
No,
I like my tandem.
it's funny you say that because I found my first hour on the radio, a cassette of my first hour on the radio. I sound like I'm 13 years old.
Yeah. Right.
So
But the
funny.
point, right. But we don't necessarily go into it going, I love how I sound. Or to your point, we either listen to it for I love it or I hate it. And there's very little in between. And giving ourselves some space to come back and listen to it again. But we're listening with a bit of a distance, right? That sort of that clarity of distance where we can really listen for the questions that we asked, the things that the client offered that we missed in that moment. And we start to really tune our ears. I think this is so crucially important as a reflective practice. So you're recording all of your coaching sessions and just for your own like opportunity to
Well,
reflect back on.
that's how it started, was just for me. But I do offer every recording to my client as a part of the package. I also share all my notes, everything I write down
Good.
in the
Yeah.
session to the client as a part of the package. And I tell them flat out, I keep them 2 years to the day, like for every morning when I schedule a coaching session, I have a reminder built into the calendar update that 2 years from that day, I will get a reminder to delete the session out of my archive.
Interesting. Well, and I think that's so well, one, I love that. I think that's a huge difference between therapy and coaching also is the transparency
Mm-hmm.
piece. Like I'll often take notes in the chat so that the client can download it
Great
and then
idea.
I don't even keep it. I'm just like, I don't need that. I
Great
may
idea.
keep a quick little reminder, but I mean, if my notes were ever subpoenaed, it'd be like, we have a contract. And here's a highlight.
Yeah. I make no I appreciate that because I make no promises when I say to a client, look, I'll share my notes with you. You're going to have everything I write down. You're going to have the recording. Bottom line is I make no guarantee that my notes are going to be worth a darn to you
Right.
because I don't take notes to keep a record of the conversation. I take notes because I'm ADHD and I need a reminder of what we've been talking about sometimes. And I need to be able to yank myself back into being fully present. That's the reality. Now, I have learned from listening to those recordings. I almost never record video. I shouldn't say that. I almost never review video. I review
The
the
audio.
audio
Mhm.
because radio. I'm very sensitive to that. I actually think I'm most effective as a coach on the phone, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people. Um, I think I'm least effective in person, which is, I've said that to other coaches and they've looked at me like I have four heads, but I really do believe that's my formative years were spent in that kind of environment. So I'm also, even though I'm a verbal processor, I'm horribly introverted. So that's one of those situations that in person really exhausts me, and I can do more with higher energy by phone or in a situation like this. And that
Yeah.
I think that tends to serve clients better. All this to say that when I review the recording, I'm looking at four levels. There's another thing I've not talked about publicly. First of all, I want to look at my technique. How was my coaching technique? Did I begin every question with what or how? Were my summaries accurate? That's a big one, by the way. Were my
Mhm.
summaries accurate? Were my summaries factually accurate? Were they emotionally accurate? Were they directionally accurate? That's a technique question. Did I actually get a reasonable coaching agreement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah.
you know,
Before I want you to finish, but I'm going to come back to this coaching agreement in a minute. So you finish.
Okay. So number two, I want to get a sense of my instincts. As I listen to the session as a third party present, is my coaching instinct aligned with what I'm hearing me do as a coach? Am I asking about the right stuff?
Right. Have I gone down a rabbit hole, or am I listening to the things that the client is actually the theme that the client is maybe talking about?
Am I conducting myself in such a way that my client is directing the session, not me? That's so critical. Third level is, is the relationship right? For example, there's a lot. This is one of the things I think coach training does us a disservice on. I say this as a guy who runs a coach training organization. If you're one of my students in any of the organizations that I've been a part of, and I've done this to you, please accept my apology. I think we as coaches, MCCs, ACTCs, coach trainers, we love to talk about how powerful transformation is in coaching. You know what? Most of my clients don't come to me for transformation. They get there. Well, some of them do, but they come to us because something's on fire.
Yeah.
And yes, it's great we're equipped to coach through transformation, but it's even greater when we're actually on the same page as our client.
Yeah, and I really think that actually aligns with this thinking that I have. So, I think as coaches who've been doing this for a while, I would imagine, I'm going to make an assumption, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that you come back to something like the competencies in new ways every time you're like each year, you probably circle it and you're in a different place with your relationship to that particular competency. And in the last year, it's really been for me agreement setting, and specifically 3.4 in this partnership where the client tells us what they believe needs to be explored in order to explore what is important to them to get to where they want to go in the conversation. And I was just listening to to your recording on your website with the business person from the WBEX video that you shared, and I saw you do 3.4, and I was like, yes, that's so great. Because I'll be honest with you, Jonathan, I am a bit of the mind at this point that if you do not get 3.4 and you don't partner with the client to have the client name what they believe needs to happen, there's no way it can be client-led, because the coach is working on an assumption. What are your thoughts? I see you nodding, but
I'm probably willing to meet you there. At the very least, this is you're teeing up the very growing edge of my competency exploration for the second half of 2024, which is I am a recovering consultant. I would rather tell you what I think you should do than draw out of you what you think you should do. So the guideline I have put in place for me, which is related to 3.4, but it's also flows out of some of the competencies in listens actively and some of the competencies in evokes awareness, which is that I am very effective, if you don't mind me saying, at noticing that something has occurred for my client. Where my efficacy drops dramatically is when I provide my own language, my language for what happened for the client. So this is a partnership with 3.4, I would suggest, in that it is great and encouraging and powerful and catalyzing when the coach says, "What just happened there?" And the client provides their language to it. And then the coach can then, this is 6.1, customize their questions based on the client's words. It's all intertwined.
It's all intertwined. I mean, and it really hits to, I mean, one of the big things that I've been working on a lot too is this idea of the use of metaphor and not bringing metaphor to the client, but rather using their language, their somatic and visual metaphors in the way that we're hearing them. And I think it fits with what you're just talking about here, which is, I mean, they don't have to think what that stuff means. It's already alive in their brain.
Mm-hmm. Let me two things are running through my head right now. One is a team coaching environment I had with a team. I don't know. This is a few months ago where they were talking about their experience working together, and one of the team members started saying, "You know what we are? We are a $400,000 Maserati, fire engine red, absolutely tuned up. We've got less than 500 miles on our engine." And we're at a traffic light that just turned green and we can't get the car in gear. And I was like, wow. And
Powerful.
and and before I could say another word, somebody else from the team continued the metaphor. He goes, and there's a really angry ex-girlfriend coming with keys in her hand, and she's gonna scrape the side of the door. And I'm like, okay, this is taking an interesting and strange turn here. But they just played off each other. And all I did, literally all I did in that coaching moment was to go, what else? And it wasn't, I mean, it was probably 10, maybe 15 minutes where they finally circled back to starting to repeat themselves. Like, okay, the metaphor is fully described. How could we
How did we
change the
get it in
metaphor?
gear?
Yeah, how do we change the metaphor to get us moving forward? And it was very helpful. It was my second session with this team. And the team leader pulled me aside afterward and it was like, I don't know how you did that. And I'm like, I didn't do anything.
But you did, because what you did was you listened and you heard it. And I mean, I think that's the piece that is so crucial. When we use the client's language, when we
Mm.
use whatever the language is that they bring forward, even the specific words they use, there's an inherent sense of being heard. But
Mhm.
there's also the reduction of that cognitive load of me having to make sense of what you're talking about. Rather, instead, you're just holding the space for what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And you teach, I mean, you're teaching at Case Western Reserve University and all of the work around positive emotional attractors and also the work around like moving from performance towards purpose and
Mhm.
what's more important. How has that changed and shifted the thinking that you have around the work that you do with people?
The number one contributor that the whole what we're describing here is the Helping People Change book that Richard Boyatzis, Ellen Van Osten, and Melvin Smith wrote, and then the work of the Coaching Research Lab at Case Western Reserve University. The number one contribution that realm has made to my coaching is the power of vision. The more clear, and metaphor speaks into this as well. Um, how clearly the client can express what it is they're moving toward. Now, I don't have some coaches have a very clear vision process saying, hey, it's got to look like this. I need to hear enough clarity from the client that they are confident that they have a picture toward which they are moving.
Right.
I can adapt in a lot of different ways. Now, that's been very helpful for me as well to, as I've thought about my own coaching practice, I reworked my values based on that. I came up with a picture of what I want my business to look like, my coaching practice, my partnerships in the various entities that I'm a part of. All of that changed based on that vision and a rallying image that is actually a tiny little subset of a much larger, it's actually an Escher drawing. It's the corner of an Escher drawing where there's a settlement brewing up, and then there's a body of water with a bridge, and there's another settlement on the other side, and there's people walking in pairs across the bridge. I'm like, you know what? I want to be the guy that gets people on the bridge.
Mhm.
And that organizing metaphor tied to the vision really made uh, it just completely reprioritized all of the various things that I had going on. And then on top of it, and this is maybe opening up another can of worms tied into the whole metaphor idea, is about a year ago I got an ADHD diagnosis. I had no idea. And I realized that I naturally have to think in a smaller, more detailed picture because of the way my brain works, so the neurodiverse way my brain works. I need a smaller, more diverse picture as a part of that vision so that it helps me choose the paths that will actually get me there. I'd rather have a big, giant, George Lucas, Star Wars galaxy vision. It's not how I'm really wired to thrive. I need a targeted vision. It can be far away, but it's got to be fairly targeted so that I can think about multiple ways to get there
Yeah,
in the course of it.
yeah,
So
that's fascinating.
last piece about that is I also have a depressive history, which is probably tied to my ADHD. So the negative emotional attractor, the PEA, NEA, positive emotional attractor, negative emotional attractor, part of the parasympathetic nervous system. The NEA is especially compelling for me naturally. One of the things I know I have to do for myself, and then by extension for my clients, is I have to drag myself out of the NEA from time to time. Because if I can't get to the PEA, I have no chance of inviting my clients to
To make
experience
that
the PEA.
shift. Yeah. Well, and it's something, so here's something I'm really curious about because you have such a breadth of knowledge. And I did have Dr. Boyatzis as my on he'll be publishing just Thursday. So I had
Yes.
a wonderful conversation with him. But with the one of the things that I see in coaching demonstrations a lot is coaches will hear something, to your point, if you're kind of wired to hear the negative, wired for that sort of survival mechanism of danger, they hear the negative thing that the client has brought forward and they don't explore the direction towards what is the goal that the client wants, or the whatever that is that the client want, the direction the client wants to go. And so they begin asking about this negative thing. If I'm hearing you correctly, do you think that there's some connectedness between how human beings generally focus on the negative because the negative is dangerous and might eat us? And so there's that. I'm seeing you nod. I'm going to be quiet. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay. So first of all, let's approach this from two different ways.
Okay.
Let's talk about this from the client's perspective. I think it can be very validating for a client and recommitting for a client in a not helpful way when a coach starts exploring that negative thing that they talk about, that they're talking about. I draw a mental when I hear, let's say I'm coaching you and you're bringing up some negative.
And I've got some anxiety and I've been really struggling with it.
All right. I draw a mental line in the timeline about 10 minutes from now. And I try to aim my questions beyond that line from that moment on, because I want to acknowledge that moment, that anxiety. Lyssa, uh, I can imagine that's a real challenge. But I also want to invite you to move yourself. This is self-determination theory. I
Mm-hmm.
want to invite you to move yourself to a new place. And then if we can get you to that new place. Now I'm not going to pick the place. Say, I'm going to say something like, all right, imagine you've got that anxiety managed. ICF assessors would hate that strategy, but some ICF assessors would hate that strategy. But I'll say, what does it look like as you interact with your coworkers, as you interact with your clients? Okay. What else does that impact when you've got that managed? And
Right. So for you, what, if I'm hearing you correctly, it is the sort of the sense of the direction the client probably wants to go is to not struggle. And so the questions become about if you're not no longer struggling with that and you're interacting and they're starting to create a mental construct of
it's a great
that.
point. It's a great point. I made an assumption there that relieving the anxiety was what you were after. Now, to really truly be directed, or not as opposed to client directed, uh, a better strategy, and I'll just self-critique myself, a better strategy on my part would have been to say, I'm hearing you about the anxiety. What would be better than that?
Yes, because then I can say that I have ease, that I'm like at peace instead of worried.
I'll give you a great example of exactly why this is important. I spent, I'm going to guess 25 minutes because I missed that my client that changed his mind about what he really wanted in a situation like this. He was angry about how fast an initiative was playing out in his company. And he literally said, I need to get over this at the beginning of our back and forth.
Get
And
in over it.
I said, great. How can I help? What would be helpful on my part? He goes, well, first I need you to listen. And he went and he said, now, I think I need you to ask me some questions about what I'm feeling here because I'm having a hard time putting this into words. Okay, great. So I started asking him questions. And one of the things he said, and I missed it, Lyssa, I missed it. I realized it when I listened back to the recording, just to tie it back to listening back to the recording. I completely missed it. I did not click when he said, you know what? I don't need to get over this. I need to use this anger. This is energy that I need for this project to level up what's going on here. I need to, this needs to be my pole for the pole vault. This was during the Olympics when this happened.
Yeah, and that pole vault was amazing.
And I was like, and I missed it. So when I reviewed the recording over this past weekend, I sent him a note going, you know what? I missed it. I goofed this up. Let's get on the phone if you think it'd be helpful and pick back up from there, kind of have a do-over. And I literally hit send on the email. This was Saturday morning. I literally hit send on the email. My phone rang 8 minutes later. He goes, I've been thinking about that ever since. Yeah, man, I'm sorry. I dropped the ball there. Now, the beauty of that is that I value the relationship enough to go, you know what? I just was reviewing this and I screwed that up. Let's take that again. It was just short of give me another chance.
Yeah.
But
there's a transparent vulnerability in acknowledging that I missed something important and pressing the send button so he could have that acknowledgement also that there was something that was important there that he was probably still noodling around.
Yes. And truthfully, I felt like in the moment, the session went where it needed to. But as I listened back to it, I heard more frustration from him that he had just said, hey, look, we needed this strategy. So we picked it up and we went there. It ended up being even better, actually by the phone on Saturday morning. I'm sitting in my living room. My wife keeps looking in the room going, are you going on a coaching call? And it was one of these situations. Now, all that to say, coming back to your original question, we switch to the coach's side. A coaching relationship is not coaching first, it's a relationship first. I'm telling all my coaching friends right now to read Charles Duhigg's book called Super Communicators.
I just bought that. I just bought it.
Move it up to the top of the list right after Richard Boyatzis' book. So the although I'm going to spoil one of the three or four big ideas right now. He says there's three kinds of conversations. There's the very practical, what are we going to do? What's going to get done kind of conversation. There's the emotional supportive conversation, where if I've got something going on emotionally, I don't need you to jump into it. I just need to talk about it. And then there's the social conversation, those ones that are just fun. And Duhigg's big idea is that when conversations go sideways, it's because one person is thinking about one of those and the other person is thinking about one of the other ones. They're not on the same page. I would suggest coaches have the same challenge. And staying in the PEA is really about when I need to be in performance coaching mode, because something's on fire, we got to fix this problem.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be there because my client said I need to talk about this from a performance improvement kind of standard. Great. No problem. For coaches, the next one is development. Sometimes coaches come to us because they need to develop a new skill or they need to develop a new understanding. It's relatively short term, but it's different than performance. But it's also different than the third one, which is honest to goodness transformation, where when I work with a coach, I want to come out and be a completely different person moving forward. Where I hear coaching recordings going sideways most often is because the coach is working on one, the client is working on the other, something else. And it's most often that the client is asking about a performance question and the coach is trying to transform. I'll say this to all my coach friends that are listening here. Stop it. In the words of Bob Newhart, the
Knock it off.
Yeah, stop it. So.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I know when you and I had chatted earlier in the year, last year, one of the things that you talked about also was really the difference between coaching people for development versus talent development. What is the differentiation between those two for you?
Okay, so talent development to me is a holistic endeavor that looks at the entire person. For example, talent development might be developing your values. It might be developing your vision. This is Richard Boyatzis as well, by the way. This is intentional change theory. It is that whole idea of when you dive into the Helping People Change book, you're going to get challenged to think about the vision for your life, plus all the abilities, the natural abilities you have, and your values, and how all that comes to life. Who's around you? All of that is a part of a talent development strategy. Now, coaching for development tends to be a lot more focused. Like if I'm in a job and I realize that, wow, I've got some financial responsibilities in this job, but I have no background. I can go to a coach that can help me close that gap. Coaching for development is often about gap closure. Talent development is often about strength enhancement. Not the same thing. There's also a coaching for development at its most is medium term. Talent development is lifelong.
Right. So one is like you have a skill deficit that needs to be addressed, and the other is more of that purpose driven. It's like Well, and it almost reminds me of what you said before, the way your brain works. You'd love to have the whole galaxy of potential, but that isn't going to be your most effective way of making it to planet X. You need
Right.
more of a direct approach for planet X than just I can go anywhere in the galaxy and eventually maybe I'll get to planet X.
Yes, this is part of my ADHD brain as well. The hardest word in the English language for me to say is no. I can't do
Mhm.
anything halfway. This is why I'm 14 years sober, is because I didn't want a drink or two. I wanted all the drinks. So I don't have any anymore as a result of that. Um, Narrowing my focus. And I think this is true for a lot of people, but not for everybody. Narrowing my focus is the critical predictor of success. That's the thing that makes me say my talent development strategy has to be here in this narrow lens, as opposed to something big, broad, and expansive. Now, for development, when I work with my coach for development, we address particular gaps, potholes. No, I'm from the Midwest.
So potholes.
It's getting to be fall. Pretty soon we'll be in pothole season, and then pretty soon we'll be in pothole filling season. And that's kind of how it goes for me when my vision is focused appropriately. I got to head down the road and discover some potholes,
Fill
and
them.
then eventually I'm going to fill them. It development is what you do on your way to talent development.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. There was there was one other piece that you had mentioned, and God, hold on a second. I'm looking at my notes real quick because
It's the government involvement in credentialing.
no, but gosh, we could sure go there. Talk to me. Wait. You know what? Go with that,
All right.
Jonathan.
You
Because
know,
I know you and I had that Facebook conversation that one time.
we maybe the related conversation from our back and forth was about
The purpose of that exam.
the exam and the difference between what happens in coaching for the credential evaluation and what I hear from folks right after they finish. I'm sure you do too. Is, wow, my clients are really accepting of a very different experience than what I had to do to get to the credential exam. And I think that's a critical developmental part, because that gets you to individuation, where I really want to hear coaches that sound like the unique people that they are,
Mhm.
that they are. I'll give you an example. A couple of weekends ago, my wife and I went to see a stand-up comedian who was an old friend of mine. This is somebody I did morning radio with a million years ago. Her name's Tammy Pescatelli. Hard to forget that particular name. We worked together for years, and we got there early. We had a chance to talk with her before the show. It was great to see her. I hadn't seen her in 25 years, 30 years, some long time. And she was exactly the same before the show as she was 30 years ago when we worked together. And then when she stepped up on stage, she was still exactly the same. It was just Tammy being funny.
Mhm.
Love that. Admire that so much about her. I think there's a wrinkle there for coaches. I don't want to hear about you holding space, because who talks like that? You know who talks like that? People who went to coach training. I want to hear about, when you talk about connecting with a client, is that what you say? When you talk about meeting with your friends, how do you talk about revisiting that relation? I want to hear you use that language in your coaching,
Mhm.
because that's you being you. And the whole point of coaching, in my opinion, is two people being themselves and relying on the likelihood that something amazing and unique will happen because they're being themselves.
Yeah.
Yes, one of the people has a skill set that they're using in the courses to provide some structure and some intention to the conversation. but it's really at the core, at the bottom of it all, it's an interpersonal connection that catalyzes something amazing and unique.
Right.
And
It's the relationship.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So
I
so
do
please
have to
be
say,
yourself.
though, I do have to acknowledge that I do use the language of holding space, but I don't think I mean it the way that, like, the intention is how I can, to your point, you like use a couple structures and things to hold that conversation with some intentionality. I don't mean it like, well, um,
Well, and quite honestly, listen, I am much more likely to use all that coaching jargon, holding the space and you know, um, you
I just
know,
like it.
your somatic awareness and all that stuff. I'm much more likely to use that in a conversation with you,
Right.
coach to coach.
Right. But not with the client,
Which
not with
no
the
problem, yeah,
client.
yeah, no problem. But when I start talking about, okay, so what do you want to agree on, or what are your intentions for this session? My clients are like, what? What
Yeah.
are you going to work on? Oh, okay, yeah, that, you
Yeah.
know, the that's one of those situations. Whenever I hear somebody say, if I ever hear someone in the real world talk about holding space, I immediately interrupt them and go, "Where'd you do your coach training?" And I bet I've done that 25 times. My wife is so embarrassed by this. And 23 times there's been an answer. So that's one of those giveaways that you're one of those working coaches that drop stuff in the middle of all this. So
Well, and
um,
I think there's a really important point you just made, which is, and I think coaches do this, they find something, a language, a tool, or whatever that, and they're like, it'll fix everything. So they explain it to the client. And I think that takes us out of the conversation that we're having with that person. So whether or not I use the language of holding space or not is irrelevant in the way that I'm conceptualizing it. But if I'm having a coaching conversation with you, that is not the place where I explain. So in coaching, I'm going to hold the space with you. It's much more like what's showing up, like what's bubbling to the surface for you for our
yeah,
conversation today,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Yes, much more like that. In fact, I have even stopped. Here's a controversial position for you. Even in my intake onboarding process, I no longer explain what coaching is.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah.
I'm thrilled to hear that. Um, I have been shushed in ICF chapter meetings for saying that, um, and that's okay. I can handle it. You can shush me if you want. The
You
the
can chat GPT what coaching is.
Yeah, and I basically said, look, I am much less concerned with what the working definition is
Mhm.
than what the client expects from me when we're in that coaching environment. I want them to understand how we're going to work together. And all of that, all the stuff from the ICF definition, it's a creative and thoughtful process, partner built on partnering, all that should all come through in how the client understands how we're going to work together.
Right.
And if I can do that, there's nothing but good things that are going to come from it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I like that. And I mean, I think there's the way that we learn these micro skills, or to your point, the potholes that we need to fill in our bumpy road. I think there's the container of a coaching conversation we need to understand. And then there's the reality of how we actually, and this is where I use, just hold that space, like be quiet or ask useful questions. I think there's like those are kind of the yin and yang. And I think it also depends on how we're using this idea of holding space, because it means different people, things to different people in different moments. So I tend to end these conversations with a question about what, maybe there's a person, a philosophy, or a book that's maybe profoundly impacted you, but you've already just talked about super communicator. I wonder, is there something else that you would say, has been pivotal in your own professional growth as a coach?
Yes. there's been a couple things. One, I'll give you three assessment tools that I recommend every coach take on themselves. I'm not suggesting you pick these up and learn to use them with a client or anything like that. But these three things, this completely changed my coaching. The first is a thing called the motivational code, which is built on this idea of the system for identifying motivated abilities. SEMA is what that's called. Believe it or not, based on the work of a psychologist named Arthur Miller, not that Arthur Miller, not the dance instructor. That was Arthur Murray, wasn't it? Arthur Miller. Um, System for identifying motivated abilities. And it came through loud and clear when I did the motivational code that my number one motivation was to be unique. I don't want to fit. I want to be the round peg in a square hole, or square peg, however that saying goes. Now, where
Whatever
that
is the
shows,
opposite.
yeah, wherever that, and how that shows up in my coaching is it helped me understand why I'm so motivated to help people discover their uniqueness, because I want to be unique. I value that really highly. That showed up. So motivational code, check that out. There is a book called Motivational Code, which is very good, by a guy named Todd Henry. It's very, very good. And that's one to pay attention to. So that's the first one. The second one is a behavioral assessment called the Harrison Assessment, which takes a snapshot of your behavioral tendencies at a given point in time. And just realizing, hey, this is what I'm likely to do, this is what I'm likely to avoid, completely changed how I understand the individuation of my own coaching. The understanding that I had about, hey, when I show up and I'm really firing on all cylinders, I'm likely to do this, I'm not likely to do that. And then the third is actually an incredible competitor of the Harrison Assessment, is a thing called the Hogan Assessment, which you probably heard of.
I've been trained in Hogan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I have become a big fan of both of these. They're very different tools. The Hogan is about your deep wiring, your personality, the bright side of your personality, what behaviors that predicts, the dark side, the things you'll have to manage and stay on top of, and then your values. It's really not about changing who you are. It's about managing what you're naturally equipped to do, which is a very different strategy than the Harrison or the motivational code. But those three tools, when I put those reports together side by side, gave me a sense of how I am likely to show up in life, but in coaching specifically, that really surprised me and really caught me. I was not prepared for how much that changed the way that I viewed myself. And then that was a critical set of insights for me. Now, last thing I'll add on top of that is if you're like me, if you find yourself getting a ADHD diagnosis late in life, it is very helpful, I would suggest, to spend a little time reading before you dive into prescription or something along those lines. And my current favorite ADHD resource is a thing called Your Brain's Not Broken.
Oh, I love that. I think so many more people than realize it have neurodiverse brains. In fact, I would say probably it's an 80-20 split where only 20% of the population has whatever is neurotypical, and the rest of us have some form of neurodiversity. And honestly, I think it's what makes people incredibly creative also. But your brain is not broken. I love that. I'll be making links to all of these things in the show notes. So
Yes, I definitely appreciate that. I'm going to go even so far as to say it not only is what makes us creative, in a lot of ways, it's what makes us interesting. It
absolutely.
it would be not nearly as much fun if all of us were the same, and being challenged like by what things like what the PhD that wrote Your Brain's Not Broken is a woman named Tamara Rozier, and it's a very thoughtful look at that anybody can benefit from, just about self-understanding and self-awareness. And that's really why I mentioned those 3 assessments. Is I would suggest to you the big opportunity for us as coaches is to deepen our own self-understanding, because everything we understand about ourselves then becomes something we have a possibility of understanding alongside of someone else.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence really teaches us that. That's the powerful lesson of emotional intelligence to me, is as we understand ourselves, it becomes more likely that we understand the people around us. And I don't think you can coach without high levels of emotional intelligence because
and
of
it
that.
also sparks your curiosity, because you may be wrong, but you can at least test the hypotheses. This is what, internally I'm noticing this, but I can ask the question, when you say that, what's showing up for you? Because I heard it, whereas if I had no self-awareness, I wouldn't have necessarily even heard it in that
Yes.
moment.
Yeah. And just to come full circle, the danger zone for us as coaches is to say, well, I'm feeling this, so you must be feeling exactly that.
Right.
Invite your client to provide their own language and see where that takes you. You'll be amazed by the results.
You'll be amazed by the results. Jonathan, thank you so much for being in the studio today with me. I have absolutely enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thank you. Definitely appreciate the opportunity, and can't wait to hear it.